however you look at it, the United States began flying over the ships and taking pictures. Okay? They started flying over and taking pictures. Well, they developed those pictures. And when they developed them, what did they see? They saw fighter jets, they saw military trucks, they saw Russian soldiers, they saw no missiles, because they had done a good job of concealing those missiles below deck, I'm assuming. So they knew they were coming with fighter jets to Cuba. They knew they were coming with military trucks and soldiers. They just didn't see any missiles on these ships. And really, probably never thought they would ever attempt to bring missiles in because of what could happen, what did happen, okay? Well, once they got in Cuba, because we continued flights over that, right? We always spied on Cuba. These Russian soldiers offloaded the missiles early in the morning while it was dark, because they knew we had planes coming over, okay? So they unloaded the missiles in the morning while it was dark. And they wore civilians' clothing, and they couldn't even speak Russian while in Cuba. That was the rule. Okay, you don't wear any military clothing, and there's no speaking of Russia in Cuba. They didn't want anything to get out, because there's so many leaks everywhere, and so much surveillance. So these Soviet soldiers were ordered to wear civilian clothing, and they were not permitted to speak Russian while they were in Cuba. Well, they got all these missiles offloaded, and on August 29th, a U-2 spy plane shot photographs of Cuba. August 29th. Is that when we talked about that date or earlier? Earlier. Well, when they developed these photographs after the August 29th flight, they saw surface-to-air missiles being constructed. Those are those missiles that shot at Rudolph Anderson's airplane. Not nuclear missiles. They saw surface-to-air missiles being constructed. Those are the ones that fired off at Anderson's plane. When they found out that the Russians were putting SAMs, or surface-to-air missiles, in Cuba, is when they thought, uh-oh, we better have some more U-2 flights. And that was the U-2 flight that resulted on October 14 that set the stage for the Cuban Missile Crisis. So you kind of follow the story here. They got in there, they started constructing SAMs, surface-to-air missiles, the kinds that shot down Rudolph Anderson, and that's when the United States thought, uh-oh, what else do they have in there? And that's why they ordered the October 14, 1962 flight. Okay? Any questions on that? There gives you an idea of the whole history behind how we got to that point in the first place. That'll take us to our next subtopic, short little subtopic, which is the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Kennedy was very famous for the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And it is what it says it is. It's a Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Now, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, both Kennedy and Khrushchev were concerned. And Khrushchev began to change Soviet world policy on nuclear weapons. So actually, Khrushchev informed his colleagues in his country and his allies that he would be in favor of a treaty to ban the testing of nuclear weapons. So again, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was Premier Khrushchev who began to change Soviet world policy, and it was Khrushchev that informed his colleagues and allies that he would be in favor of a treaty to ban the testing of nuclear missiles. Now, the United States and Kennedy had been pushing this for some time. Eisenhower as well. We're trying to push a test ban treaty on nuclear weapons. And it wasn't until after the closeness of World War III, so to speak, that Khrushchev woke up and said, you know, that might not be a bad idea. So on July 25th, 1963, on July 25th of 1963, the Soviet Union and the United States and Great Britain all signed a treaty to promise to end all nuclear test explosions. July 25th, 1963, the Soviet Union, the United States, and Great Britain all signed a treaty that promised to end all nuclear test explosions. where do you test nuclear weapons? Where are 3 areas you test them? The ocean, underwater, in the Earth's atmosphere, and in outer space. So those 3 areas were banned from any nuclear missile testing. In the Earth's atmosphere, in outer space, or underwater. And this agreement became known in the Kennedy administration as the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. One of the greatest accomplishments of his short presidency was getting that through. But it took the Cuban Missile Crisis to convince Khrushchev that it was a good idea. Okay, last thing we'll talk about, I just want to give you some information about Kenneth O'Donnell. He was such a key character in this whole thing. Not a lot of people know who he is. I can tell you there's not very many history students this year in Wyoming that know who Kenneth O'Donnell is or what his contribution was to our history. And I want you to know a little bit about Kenny O'Donnell. Interesting fellow. Give you a short profile. O'Donnell was actually born Patrick Kenneth O'Donnell on March 4th, 1924. So his birth name was Patrick Kenneth O'Donnell. And he was born on March 4th, 1924. So he was actually born Patrick Kenneth O'Donnell on March 4th, 1924. He was the son of Holy Cross football coach and athletic director Cleo O'Donnell. So his father was a head football coach and athletic director at Holy Cross University, which is a Catholic private college in the East. Well, Kenneth O'Donnell grew up like every other kid did, and he also served in the United States Army Air Corps from 1942 to 1945. Kenneth O'Donnell serves in the U.S. Army Air Corps from 1942 to 45. So remember when President Kennedy said, "You're used to looking down bomb sites, what do you think about this?" early in the crisis? That's because he served in the U.S. Army Air Corps and had some experience in that. Well, after World War II ended, he went to Harvard University where he met first Robert Kennedy and later his brother John. So after World War II, he attends Harvard University. At Harvard, he meets first Robert Kennedy and then his brother John. And it was he and Bobby that became very, very close friends as a result of the Harvard years. And they continued to be friends after O'Donnell attended Boston College Law School. So were John Kennedy and Kenneth O'Donnell good friends? Yes. But Bobby Kennedy and Kenneth O'Donnell were best friends. Okay? Were best friends. Well, O'Donnell graduated from Harvard, went to Boston College Law School, didn't pan out for him, the law school part. And then he went to work as a salesman for a paper company. And that was located in Boston. And when John Kennedy was running for the Senate in 1952, Kenneth O'Donnell helped with that. He wasn't the campaign manager because that was Bobby, but he assisted John Kennedy in his bid for the Senate in 1952 while he was working for this paper company in Boston. Well, go ahead. No, just a couple. Now, it was in the early 1960s when Kenneth O'Donnell legally changed his name from Patrick Kenneth O'Donnell to Kenneth Patrick O'Donnell. He changed that in the early 1960s, and he was the appointments secretary for Kennedy during his presidential run. Okay, he was the campaign scheduler for Senator Kennedy during his presidential run. And we all know that in 1961, he followed the Kennedys to the White House, serving as President Kennedy's special assistant and appointments secretary. Probably don't have to write that down because you know that. So after he was elected, and he was one of President Kennedy's top advisors, along with people like David Powers, people like Lawrence O'Brien, people like Theodore Sorensen, and all of those guys that were considered Kennedy's closest aides or advisors had a nickname. They called it what? The Irish Mafia. Just a little nickname, kind of a joke. They called his group of closest advisors, like O'Donnell and Powers and Sorensen, the Irish Mafia. Now, does every president have a chief of staff? They do. Yeah, they have somebody that's a chief of staff. Well, really, it was kind of interesting because Kennedy never officially filled that position. But everybody believed that it was O'Donnell that served in that capacity. But he didn't have a chief of staff, okay, officially. But historians will tell you that O'Donnell, in essence, was Kennedy's chief of staff, despite not receiving the title, because he never filled that position. During the Kennedy presidency, O'Donnell was a critic of the Vietnam War, and he advised President Kennedy to end America's involvement in that conflict, which many historians believe he would have if he would have continued to live as president. He was not for digging us deep in Vietnam. He had a speech with Walter Cronkite that we'll show you later when we get into Vietnam, showing pretty specifically that he would have not taken the same course of action that Lyndon Johnson did in Vietnam. And O'Donnell was a critic of the Vietnam War and told the president it's a bad thing to get into. Well, in November of 1963, which you'll hear later, O'Donnell was involved in the organization of the presidential trip to Dallas, Texas. And on the date and the time that the president was assassinated on November 22nd, O'Donnell was seated in a Secret Service car with David Powers in the car immediately behind the presidential limousine, which was behind the Secret Service. So it was the presidential limousine, a Secret Service vehicle, and then a car in which O'Donnell and Powers were in. Both men saw the president firsthand shot. Both men witnessed. Very, very tough work. Well, after the president's assassination, O'Donnell left the Kennedy cabinet, and he ran unsuccessfully for the Democratic nomination for governor of Massachusetts. In other words, he never got to the final. He ran against another candidate for the Democratic nomination for governor, but did not win that election, so obviously he did not run for the full office. What do you think he did in 1968 when Robert Kennedy decided to run for president? He was his campaign manager. Yep. So in 1968, Kenneth O'Donnell served as campaign manager for Robert Kennedy's presidential campaign, and he had to go through another assassination of a great friend, and that was tough on him as well. Well, after the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, O'Donnell actually helped the presidential campaign of Hubert Humphrey when he ran for president, which we'll talk about. Finally, he got out of politics, and in 1976, Kenneth O'Donnell and David Powers published a book entitled Johnny, We Hardly Knew Ye, Memories of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, which some of you have and some of you have seen. Well, O'Donnell unfortunately died on September 9th of 1977. What do you think he died of? Think about his life. Alcoholism. He was a heavy drinker, and he drank even heavier after the burdens. So he died in 1977. Of alcoholism. Now, you know, kind of a tough deal for him. Well, in 1998, his daughter, Helen O'Donnell, published a book entitled A Common Good, The Friendship of Robert F. Kennedy and Kenneth O'Donnell. And this was written by Helen O'Donnell in 1998.
So why do you think it's
I think he thought it was maybe more political. I don't know really why. You might research that. He just chose to do. That's a great book, Helen O'Donnell. So a great friendship. Okay, I got a question for you now. We can either have an open note test on Monday, or I can give you the open note test. You can take it home over the weekend, and you can have it handed in by the start of the period. Whatever you would like to do would be fine with me. So what will be the, we'll take just a simple vote. How many of you would like, we're going to start with President Kennedy and civil rights. We're going to move.
So either way, are we lecturing on Monday?
Well, no, Monday, if you want to take the test on Monday, we'll go to the Commons and take the test and start lecturing Tuesday. if you want to get the test out of the way with the weekend and have a little more, it doesn't matter to me.
Wait, are we using the same
Yeah.
test Monday?
You are.
Take it on Monday.
Okay. How many want, I don't know if you want extra work over the weekend, I don't know what your load is, you know? So, how many would like to just take the open note test in the Commons on Monday? Okay, right, that's what we'll do. So, make sure you plan. So maybe we'll go through and just give you a little bit of what you might want to concentrate on, unless you want to not have it. Okay? Here's, I'll just read the questions to you so you can prepare yourself. Maybe what you can do is get your notes and highlight them so you don't have to run through all the notes here. Okay? Here's question number 1. What were the 3 allowances to be considered by the Kennedy administration that ABC correspondent John Scally passed on to President Kennedy from Premier Khrushchev through Soviet spy Alexander Fomin? What were the 3 things that Kennedy would consider? 1, that the Soviets would remove the missiles in Cuba. What was the next one? The missiles would be returned to the United States. Or to the Soviet Union, I'm sorry. The 3rd thing was? What the construction pads would be dismantled. Okay? Now, I want to make a point that I don't think I made very clear. It was the United States that insisted that the missiles be withdrawn under UN inspection because they wanted it right. So the first question, what were the 3 allowances to be considered by the Kennedy administration that ABC correspondent John Scally passed on to President Kennedy from Premier Khrushchev through the Soviet spy Alexander Fomin? And then the second question is, what would the United States promise in return if President Kennedy agreed to the message he received from Scally? A guarantee not to invade. That was it.
Is on the first one, do we not put the under UN inspection?
No, because I'm going to go to the 5th question. What adjustment did President Kennedy make to one of the 3 allowances given by Premier Khrushchev? That the missiles would be removed under UN inspection. Okay? So, remember that Khrushchev said he would remove the missiles. He said he would dismantle the launching pads. He said what? He wanted to make sure that he got the missiles back. And then we said, okay, what do you want in return? What they want in return is a promise, no invasion pledge. But what adjustment did we make? We wanted the missiles removed under UN inspection. Okay. When President Kennedy asked Kenneth O'Donnell to dig up some information to see if indeed Khrushchev and Fomin knew each other, what did O'Donnell come up with? Simply, they were war buddies. Okay? What was the contents of Premier Khrushchev's first letter to President Kennedy after the president stated he would be favorable to the Soviet offer placed through Scally and Fomin? What was his first letter stated? His own personal fear of nuclear war, and that he would remove the missiles and missile launching pads in Cuba if we promised to do 2 things. Remove the quarantine and promise not to invade. Okay? Just kind of keep that in mind. Okay, next question. When XCOM received the second letter from Khrushchev that was completely opposite of the first letter they received from him, what was their initial reaction? There had been a military coup. I don't know if we'll answer all these to run out of time, but you can. What action did President Kennedy take when he was informed that new spy photographs confirmed that all missiles would be operational in 36 hours? What was the last question that Kenneth O'Donnell asked Major Rudolph Anderson prior to the pilot's departure from Orlando, Florida to Cuba? Are you a religious man? I'm just going to go through them. Who bailed out President Kennedy after it was discovered that Major Anderson's plane had been shot down over Cuba when the military was pressuring the president to order airstrikes immediately? Curtis LeMay. What did Kenneth O'Donnell do while XCOM considered final options to settle a crisis in Cuba? Went and watched his son's football game. What was Kenneth O'Donnell's reaction to what XCOM was considering to finally settle a crisis in Cuba. I'll help you with this one. His reaction was he thought it was the wrong thing to do because it was going to result into trade after trade after trade until they wanted us to trade something we wouldn't do, which was Berlin. He also got a little irritated because he blamed Bobby and Jack Kennedy, saying that the leak that you sent out there is what gave Khrushchev the notion to send out the second letter after the first. You gave him the notion that you'd trade missiles in Turkey. That's not true necessarily. But anyway.
Just like sent the first one and the second one, and realized like, oh wait a minute.
Actually, the truth in history is, they came in reverse order. They came in reverse order. I was going to say, they came in reverse order. That's the truth of history. The letters came in reverse order. The first one was supposed to say missiles in Turkey, and when we said no, they would settle for the second. They came in reverse order.
So he sent the first one because the military told him first, and then he sent the second one just to sell.
And they got mixed up, yeah. They got mixed in reverse order. Okay, moving on here so we can get through these for you. Why were the Soviets burning their documents just before Robert Kennedy's final meeting with Soviet Dobrynin? Thought we were going to war. What did Kenneth O'Donnell do outside the waiting room of the Attorney General's office while Bobby visited with Ambassador Dobrynin? Whistle him up some luck. At the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy thanks XCOM for their efforts. Explain his statement, "We, the United States, should not gloat." Because it was just as much a victory for them as it was for us. What did President Kennedy do in the Oval Office shortly after congratulating XCOM on the final result of the Cuban Missile Crisis? Wrote a letter to Rudolph Anderson's mother and father. After the Cuban Missile Crisis was over, Kenneth O'Donnell went to the White House Oval Office and picked up a paperweight on his desk. What was the quote on the paperweight that might have summed up the entire crisis for both the United States and the Soviet Union? Oh God, thy sea is so great, and my boat is so small. Okay? You're going to need